How did Nick know when to do this crime? The timelines that morning.
I told him.
Who planned this murder?
I did.
Gypsy Blanchard admitted to helping her boyfriend kill her mother in 2015.
Nick was happy to do whatever Gypsy wanted.
Now, more than 8 years later, she is set to walk out of prison a free woman. Thanks for joining us here on Law and Crime. I'm Anjanette Levy. Gypsy Blanchard admitted that she planned the murder of her mother, Claudine D.D. Blanchard, in 2015. That would usually land someone in prison for many, many years, if not the rest of their lives. But Gypsy Blanchard will be released in December, right after Christmas, after being granted parole. Gypsy Blanchard testified at the trial of her then-boyfriend, Nick Godejohn, in 2018. Gypsy and Nick met on a Christian dating website. Nick was Gypsy's first boyfriend. Gypsy said she wanted to kill her mom because her mom had abused her and held her captive.
And what was going on in your home life that made you reach the point where you did that or made that decision?
I was growing increasingly desperate to get out of my home life.
Did you tell Nick that?
Yes.
And what was your mom doing that caused you to be more desperate?
Things were getting physically and more physically abusive. The hitting was more. The starving was more.
Now, you mentioned you were in a wheelchair. Were you required to act any certain way when you were in a wheelchair?
Yes, sir.
How was that?
She would have me stay very quiet and pretend like I couldn't walk.
Gypsy said D.D. Blanchard told people that her daughter was a terminally ill teenager, when in fact she was perfectly healthy and in her 20s. Gypsy said her mother did this so she could garner sympathy and collect donations. When a parent convinces a child they are ill, it's called Munchausen syndrome by proxy, and it's a form of abuse. The prosecutor told the jury that Nick Godejohn traveled from Wisconsin to Missouri to kill D.D. Blanchard at Gypsy's request.
36 hours prior, he got on a Greyhound bus in Milwaukee, knowing he was coming to Springfield to murder Claudine. That bus stopped in 3 different cities as the defendant sat on it, knowing he was coming to Springfield to murder Claudine. That wasn't the first time the defendant deliberated. It was a year prior when the defendant, while speaking with his girlfriend Gypsy, was first introduced to the idea of killing Claudine Blanchard, a year prior. And the evidence will show that although it was Gypsy's idea, it was the defendant's deliberation that led to him standing outside of Claudine's bedroom door with gloves on, dressed in black, holding a knife, and thinking, the bitch is dead. And the evidence will show that after that deliberation on June 10th of 2015, he entered that bedroom and stabbed Claudine Blanchard to death.
But the defense said Nick Godejohn had a low IQ coupled with Asperger's syndrome, which impacted his ability to make good decisions, and that Gypsy manipulated him.
Gypsy knew there was only one way she was going to be able to spend a life with Nick. There was only one way to get out from under the grasp of her mother, and that was to kill her mother. Gypsy formulated this plan, and she wavered on it. For a while, she was committed to it. Later, she decided, no, that's not the right thing. Nick was happy to do whatever Gypsy wanted. He was always compliant. And finally, Gypsy said, it's getting worse here. This has to be done. She stole some more money from her mother, provided that to Nick to come down on a bus and stay in a hotel. She stole a knife from Walmart so that Nick could use that as the murder weapon, and provided Nick with gloves and tape and everything he would need to go through with her plan. Nick arrived there at the house Knife was ready, gloves were ready, tape was ready. He entered that home and saw Gypsy standing there. A girl who could walk, not someone captive in a wheelchair. Looking around the living room, there were wheelchairs. The devices that bound her. And Nick went through with Gypsy's plan.
Gypsy Blanchard took a deal and testified against Nick Godejohn at his trial, laying out in detail how she planned the murder of her mother.
Now, I want to start talking about June of 2015. You mentioned that you had decided to kill your mother at some point.
Yes, sir.
Was that the only plan you ever had in terms of how to get out of your situation?
Besides running away, that is the only thing, yes.
Did you have other alternative plans other than killing your mother?
Yes.
How many plans altogether did you have?
3.
Okay. Did you have names for those plans?
Yes.
What were the names?
Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C.
And could you tell us about the other 2 possibilities other than killing your mother?
Yes. Plan A, we already had tried that, which was to meet up at the movie theater, act like we never met before, and try and start a relationship from there, with my mother's permission.
And what was the other alternative plan?
Another one was for me to get pregnant. I believed that since he would be the father, he would have to be in my life.
Now, Nick came down to Springfield again in June of 2015, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Who paid for that trip?
I did.
How did you get money to him to come down on that trip?
I stole money from my mother, and I sent it to him via the mail.
Do you have any idea exactly how much money you sent to Nick?
Over $1,000.
And in these 2 trips to Springfield, how much of his own money was used?
I do not know.
Are you aware that he spent any of his money on either of these 2 trips?
No, sir.
Blanchard also described how she gathered the items Godejohn would use to murder her mother in June of 2015.
Was this when your mother was murdered?
Yes.
And when was that, specifically?
June 10th, 2015.
Do you know about what time she was murdered?
Maybe about 3 a.m. in the morning.
And after her murder, what time did you leave?
Maybe 6 in the morning.
After the murder, where did you go, you and Nick?
We went back to the hotel, the Days Inn Hotel. I supplied the knife.
Where did you get the knife?
I stole it from Walmart
And why did you steal it from Walmart?
because I didn't see a knife that was sufficient enough in our own home.
Blanchard also described what she did after she and Nick Godejohn traveled to Wisconsin.
And how long were you at the house until law enforcement came?
2 days.
What were your plans going forward? What did you plan on doing?
Just staying with him and living forever there.
Give any thought to possibly the police locating you? Did that ever occur to you?
No, sir.
What did you think would happen to you?
Thought maybe that if people knew that I was gone, they would just think I was missing. And missing people go, unfound all the time. So I just thought I'd remain a missing person.
Now, there was a Facebook post made about this case. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, sir.
Do you know where that Facebook post was made, on whose account?
Yes, sir.
Whose account?
My mother's.
Okay. What did the Facebook post say, if you can recall exactly, or close to it?
That bitch is dead.
Was there a comment in the post as well about the daughter?
Yes, sir.
What was that comment?
I don't remember exactly how it was worded.
Was it
Something to the fact of, I raped her sweet innocent daughter. Her laugh was so fucking loud.
who made that post?
I did.
Did you make that post pretending to be somebody else?
Yes.
And who were you pretending to be?
Nick.
And why would you make that post claiming to be Nick?
I wanted her to be found.
Blanchard also testified about her sex life with Nick Godejohn.
You were asked a little bit about, during your relationship, these alter egos that the defendant and you came up with. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
It was the defendant who first introduced you to that idea of alter egos.
Yes, sir.
And he actually first told you about his alter ego, Victor. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
And Victor was a vampire that was 500 years old.
Yes, sir.
And you decided to come up with your alter egos just to kind of please him.
Yes, sir.
And also, as part of this fantasy, you also started to kind of consider yourselves as master and slave, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the defendant was the master,
Yes, sir.
and you were the slave.
Yes, sir.
And at one point, he had sent you basically like a bill of sale, kind of ownership papers. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
And those papers would basically mean that the defendant owned you.
Yes, sir.
And you also were asked a little bit about the videos that you and the defendant sent back and forth. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
And on a lot of those videos that you would send, the defendant would actually send you a script beforehand, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that script would instruct you on what to do in the videos.
Yes, sir.
Nick Godejohn confessed to killing Dee Blanchard when interviewed by police.
Where's the first place you decided to stab her?
And I just was in a random spot in the back.
In the back, just random.
Yes.
Do you know how many times you stabbed her?
4.
You stabbed her 4?
Yeah, 4 times.
Okay.
The 4th one, I felt it go into, I think it might have been her lungs.
Okay.
Because it was harder to get out.
Okay. Did it take one hand to get it out, 2 hands?
I had to yank it out
Okay.
with one hand.
Okay. So it did. So the others came out easy, but that one kind of came out harder.
Yep.
Okay. And so, you only stabbed her 4 times? Are you sure about that?
Well, as it's stabbing, I stabbed her 4 times.
Okay.
But I did actually cut her one other time besides that.
Okay. Where'd you cut her
On
at?
the back of her neck.
Okay. And then did you use the same knife that you
No.
did the others with?
Yep.
Okay, and when you did the cross the back of the neck, did that even cause an injury, or did you see any blood or anything?
Yeah, she was bleeding.
Okay, she's bleeding. And so did she scream or holler, or
Yeah, she did.
what was she saying?
First she said help, and then she didn't recognize who I was, and she
Okay.
said, who are you, and then,
She said, who are you?
yeah,
Okay, and she didn't recognize who you are, and she says help, and then what does she say?
and then she called up for Gypsy, but Gypsy didn't do anything.
Okay, she hollered for Gypsy.
Yes,
And did she holler for Gypsy once, twice, 5 times,
3 times.
3 times? And
The defense claimed he was manipulated by Gypsy Blanchard. Nick Godejohn was autistic and had an IQ of 82, which is described as low average. They described his early childhood.
Can you tell us a little bit about his birth? Is there anything notable as a psychologist about his birth, or what you know about it?
His father reported to me that some indication his mother might have drank during the pregnancy, and there might have been some drug use. He knew about one occasion for each. The birth was complicated. She was in labor, I think for 13 hours, and the umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck. And they used a suction cup to deliver him. And the doctors told his father that his brain may have been deprived of oxygen for a period of time during the delivery because of the umbilical cord.
And when was he born?
His birth date is May 20, 1989.
Did you find anything about his family life
I did.
as he was growing up? Tell us about that.
When his mom and dad were married, they split up when he was about 4 years old. It was not a happy marriage. They did not get along very well.
But the prosecution said Nick Godejohn made a choice and thought through murdering Dee Dee Blanchard.
He also, as you heard, had the capacity to realize they may get caught. And if we get caught, we should probably have a story. And you saw both from the testimony of Gypsy, but even here in these text messages, you see they're starting on the right. Dear, please go with the story. I told my mom and stepdad. And then you see Gypsy responding, please let me know what story. And then the defendant, I'll tell you in person, dear, because I'll be able to explain it better then. That was his story, his deliberation on what would happen if they got caught. And you heard it in his interview. That was the first story he told. When he said, I came up here because Gypsy got kicked out of her house, so I just came on the Greyhound and brought her back. That's their story, but he came up with it because he had the capacity to think ahead of what might happen after the murder. On June 9th, as he's sitting at the Days Inn, he sends this text message. Dear, should I ask you this before he has to? Is your mom a light or a deep sleeper? Again, that didn't come from Gypsy. That's not her words. That is the defendant having the capacity to think, if I'm going to a victim who's sleeping, a light sleeper may awake, may create more of a fight versus a deep sleeper.
In the end, the jury believed the prosecution.
As to count one, we, the jury, find the defendant, Nicholas Godejohn, guilty of murder in the first degree, as submitted in instruction number 6.
Gypsy Blanchard was sentenced to 10 years in prison after pleading guilty to second-degree murder. She's getting out of prison after serving 85% of that sentence. Gypsy Blanchard told Dr. Phil several years ago she didn't believe she should have served as much time as she did. For Law and Crime, I'm Anjanette Levy.